So I don't know how I'm going to follow that, especially since sometimes I get stage fright, and so I always need to have my notes with me. But anyways, hi, I'm Susan Fowler. So my book is Whistleblower. It just came out a few days ago. Thank you. I was just on PBS, so this is my PBS suit. Now, you might be familiar with part of my story, the really, really famous part, the part about how one day in February 3 years ago, almost to the day, there was a blog post on someone unknown's blog about her experiences as a female software engineer at Uber. I wrote the blog post 2 months after I left the company. I was only there for a year, and in that 1 year, I'd been sexually harassed, I'd been bullied, I'd been discriminated against, I'd been retaliated against, and I'd seen my coworkers treated in similar ways, sometimes in way worse ways. The sexual harassment was really only the tip of the iceberg. The blog post went viral, and after a really stressful and horrific series of months in which I was followed and I had, smears being spread about me in the press and had all my online accounts hacked. The CEO of Uber was ousted from the company, and a bunch of high-ranking employees were fired. Oh. Thank you. After I left Uber, and I knew I was going to have to tell my story. I knew I was going to have to tell a story of the real Uber. The Uber that I and my coworkers knew, and share it with the world. But I was terrified to do it because I knew what happened to other whistleblowers in the past. I was afraid that they were going to come after me. They did. I was afraid that I'd never work as a software engineer in Silicon Valley ever again. That also happened. I was afraid that people would try to discredit me, and I'd have to spend a long time defending myself against those things, and I did. But I was okay with the price that I would have to pay for blowing the whistle because I knew it was the right thing to do. And I knew that I would be okay if I had to start my career all over from scratch because this would be, one of many times that I'd have to do that. I'd redefined myself so many times before, and I'd built my life up from scratch so many times before, and I'd learned from all those times of all those years of fighting for a better life that I could do it again. I was resilient. And I had something that a lot of my coworkers didn't have, which is I had nothing to lose. A lot of my coworkers, some of them had visas, work visas, and so if they spoke up and said anything, they'd be sent out of the country. They didn't have the kind of opportunities that I had. And I spoke up because I knew I could do it again, and I was resilient. And I think the most important thing was that I knew what to say, and I knew how to say it, and I knew when to say it because I'd been through the almost the exact same situation before, and I hadn't spoken up. And I carried this guilt and this regret with me for years. And I kind of hoped, not wanting to have another chance, but thinking to myself, I'm never going to make that mistake again. I'm never, ever going to let anyone silence me ever again. And so when the time was right, and I found myself sitting in my kitchen, and I had all this documentation of everything that was going on at the company, I thought, okay, here's my chance. I know what to do. I know how to do it, and I have to do it. It's the right thing to do, regardless of the consequences. But it took me a whole life to learn what to do. I was raised in poverty in rural Arizona. I was one of 7 children. My father was an evangelical preacher who sold vacuums and then payphones and then life insurance door to door. My mother stayed home to homeschool me and my 6 siblings. I was homeschooled until about the 6th grade, and then my mother had to return to work because we were so poor that, we didn't know if we were going to eat, and sometimes we didn't eat. And so she went back to work, and my younger siblings went to school, and for reasons that I still don't quite understand, I was not able to go to school. Me and my older sister, we ended up having to homeschool ourselves. So as a teenager, unlike, all the other kids my age, unlike my friends in the neighborhood, I had to work. I worked various below minimum wage jobs. I worked with spiders, which was really fun. Got to milk the venom from black widows, and that was quite an adventure. And I studied at night. So I'd work, I'd come home, I'd sit on my bed, and I'd just read every book that I could find in the library. But I knew where my life was headed. And I knew I had to escape poverty, and I had to do something different. Because even all the young people in my hometown who had gone to school, they couldn't get jobs, they were living on welfare, they were addicted to drugs, they didn't have any way out. And a lot of them were trying very, very hard to get out, and they couldn't. And I snapped one day, and I said, I have to change this. I have to fight for a better life. I'm not going to let this be my fate. And I believed that if I could make it to college, that somehow I would be able to overcome the circumstances of my life. So I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call every high school and every college that I can, and I'm going to ask them, now what is like a good, normal high school student look like? Like, what kind of things did they study? What kind of textbooks did they study? The first few times I remember they hung up on me. I think they were really confused about what I was trying to ask. But eventually I figured it out. So I had this whole list of all the textbooks that I needed to study, and I made this transcript. So I'd come home from work, and I'd sit down, and I'd study 6th grade English, 7th grade English, and there'd be a textbook. And I made this little transcript that said Susan Fowler's Homeschool on the top. And I'd never taken a standardized test before, but they told me that there was this thing I had to take. It was on all the admissions requirements pages, and it said you had to take the SAT or the ACT. And I was like, okay, I think I'm going to take the ACT. That sounds a little easier than the SAT. So I show up at this high school one day, and all these kids are there, and they're like all talking about their tutors and all the things that they've done, and I have no idea what anybody's talking about. I've never taken a standardized test in my life. And I showed up, and I just was like, okay, sitting there with everybody, trying to figure out what's going on. And amazingly, kind of terrifyingly, I don't know if I'd be able to do it again if I had to, I scored really, really well. So well, in fact, that I got the best scholarship offered in the state and ended up getting a full scholarship to Arizona State University, just on the basis of my ACT score. And college turned out to be everything I'd ever dreamed of, and so much more. It wasn't just a ticket out of poverty, it was a place where I could explore and I could learn everything that I wanted. And I really wanted to know everything. I'd gone through my whole life without having a formal education, and so it was like, you always want what you can't have. And so for all these years, I just wanted so badly, like, someone teach me something, someone tell me about what's going on in the world. Originally, I was a philosophy major, and then one day it was amazing. I love philosophy. And then one day I had to sign up for these general science requirements, and so I took this really low-level astronomy class, and I was astounded. I mean, here's this religious background homeschool kid who's like, wait, there are what out there? There are these galaxies, and there are stars that are really far out there, and we've sent these little machines out into the universe, and I was like, oh my God, I need to know everything. I need to know everything about this. So I said, okay, I'm going to study physics. The bad news is that when I went to go and, change my major to physics, they said, well, if you look at the requirements for the degree, you really don't fit, You don't have any math, you don't have any science. Now, you can take the prerequisites, but it's going to take you a really long time. It's going to take you years, because I'd have to start below remedial thing. I remember even one person saying, I don't even know if they offer math classes that low. It's like, oh, okay. But that didn't stop me, because I said, you know what? I know enough about myself. I got into college. If I really want to understand this stuff, I can. So then I said, instead of fitting into the requirements, I'm going to go a step up. I'm going to apply to the top schools in the country, all the ones that accept transfer students, and then if I get accepted into any of them, I'm going to call them up, and I'm going to say, hey, can I take math and physics classes? So I did that, and the highest ranked one that said yes was the University of Pennsylvania. So I found myself at the University of Pennsylvania. I was an Ivy League student, which was very surreal. And you know, when I arrived, I really thought, I've made it. You know, everything's going to be amazing. I'm going to learn all these things. I'm going to become a physicist. Because everything had been really amazing at Arizona State. It was a great place. You know, the professors really believed in me. They mentored me. I was taking graduate classes. Before I left, I was taking these graduate classes in philosophy and learning about ethics, which came in really handy later. So I find myself, oh my gosh, I have 1 minute left. Okay, so things get crazy at Penn, like really, really, really crazy, okay? So, long story short, I get harassed by this student, get in this weird situation. The school doesn't know what to do. They're afraid he's going to kill himself if I don't love him. And I'm like, oh my God. So I was on track to get a PhD in physics. I was going to apply. I was finishing up my bachelor's degree. I was going to go and apply to PhD programs. When I tried to report this student and the things that were happening, the school freaked out. And so instead of letting me file a Title IX complaint, they instead ended up rescinding my master's degree in philosophy that I've been working on. And it was wrong, and I knew it was wrong, and I didn't want to spend the next 2 to 5 years of my life fighting them in court. So instead, I walked away. I didn't say anything. I gave up my dreams of being a physicist, and I regretted it every single day after. And I promised myself that I would never, ever let that happen again. And I found myself in Silicon Valley because I didn't know what to do. I was like, I had been at Penn for these years, and I'd studied all these things, and I was taking classes in quantum field theory, and I was building electronics for the Atlas detector, and now all of a sudden, I'm just like everyone else around me, and everyone's like, yeah, we don't even know what we're doing after graduation either, which was pretty relieving. So I thought, okay, what do I know? I know how to code, because I'd learned how to code from doing my physics research. So I work at 2 small startups, and then I find myself at Uber. And we all know what happened there. And if you don't, there's a lot of stuff in that book. And if you don't want to read 70,000 words, there's also a 3,000 word summary you can find online, also an appendix in your books. I was harassed and discriminated and retaliated against, but they did not know what they were, they didn't know who they had sitting across from them, because I'd learned from my time at Penn how to document everything. I learned how to figure out what my legal rights were. So when they would tell me, we're going to fire you if you ever report anything to HR, I'd be like, that's illegal. Reporting this to HR, sorry. And, when I realized things weren't going to change, I went to the CTO, the highest person in my management chain at the company, and I got the same song and dance and gaslighting, And I realized things weren't going to get better, so I spoke up and I blew the whistle. I did the thing that I wished I had done in the past. And stepping back a minute, because I have 1 minute, throughout all these experiences in my life, I wanted so badly not to be a victim of my story, right? Like I didn't want to be a victim of my circumstances. I wanted to be the hero of my story. And I would read these books, and these people would be like, they're the protagonists. They're like making things happen. And I was like, but why? I'm not doing that. Why are things happening to me? And as I've grown older and I've met thousands and thousands of young men and women who are, they're trying to make their way in the world. And I think that they find themselves in the same struggle, because I hear them, talking about it, about how they're trying to figure out the world. They're trying to figure out what their place is in it. And they're pointing out that, the world is so unjust. What do I do? Am I supposed to do anything? Am I supposed to say anything? I wrote this book for them because I think, when we go through situations like this where they're so extreme and you want to make them count for something and you learn these very hard and painful lessons, what's the point of doing any of that if you're not able then to give that to other people and help them learn those lessons too, so they don't have to learn them the hard way? I really want them to be able to become, the heroes of their own stories. So, at the end of the day, skipping through my notes because I went a little over, the book is really about how I found my way in the world and how I learned how to stand up for what's right. And my hope is that it'll inspire others, especially young people who might find themselves in similar situations, to do the same. Thank you so much.